She walked into that ballroom worth more than everyone in the room combined, and they still made her feel like she didn't belong there. One woman, $1 billion company, and a room full of people who only saw what she looked like. But the night she was humiliated in front of Chicago's most powerful, one man stepped forward. Not a billionaire, not an executive, a maintenance supervisor with grease still under his fingernails and a daughter waiting for him at home. What happened next changed both of their lives forever. If this story moves you, hit like and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches. Now let's begin. The invitation had arrived 6 weeks ago, printed on cardstock thick enough to double as a cutting board, the lettering embossed in gold that caught the light when she tilted it. The Meridian Foundation Annual Gala, black tie, Chicago Hilton Grand Ballroom, Saturday, October 14th. At the bottom, in smaller font, in honor of this year's Community Leadership Award recipients. Brielle Maddox had set the invitation on her kitchen counter and stared at it for 2 full minutes before she picked up her phone and called her assistant. "Tell them yes," she said. "You sure? You skipped the last 3. "I'm sure." She hadn't been sure. She still wasn't, standing now in the elevator of the Chicago Hilton, watching the numbers climb toward the ballroom floor, her reflection staring back at her from the polished brass doors. 31 years old, the founder and CEO of Luminary Systems, a tech company she had built from a 2-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park with $12,000, a second-hand server rack, and about 4 years of working until her eyes bled. The company now employed over 2,000 people, held contracts with 3 Fortune 100 firms, and had been valued at just over $1.2 billion at their last funding round. None of that was visible in the elevator reflection. What was visible was the dress, burgundy silk, floor length, custom made because off the rack had stopped working for her years ago. And the woman wearing it. Brielle at 5'6" and 234 pounds. Brielle with the natural hair she had finally stopped fighting and let grow into something full and proud above her shoulders. Brielle with the jawline her mother used to cup between both hands and call strong. Brielle, who had spent the last decade making herself impossible to ignore in every boardroom she entered, and who was still, standing in an elevator counting her own breath before she walked into a party. She exhaled hard through her nose. "Stop it," she said to the reflection. The elevator opened. The ballroom was the kind of space that made you feel small on purpose. 4 stories of ceiling, chandeliers the size of compact cars, dripping with crystal that fractured the light into hundreds of separate pieces. Circular tables draped in white linen, each one centered with a low arrangement of white roses and eucalyptus. Open bar along the east wall. String quartet in the far corner playing something Brielle recognized vaguely as Vivaldi. Around 300 people filling the space, all of them dressed like they had been doing this their entire lives, which most of them had. She took a flute of sparkling water from a passing tray and oriented herself. The Meridian Foundation's annual gala was technically a charity event. Proceeds went to workforce development programs on the south and west sides. But in practice, it functioned as Chicago's premier social mixer for the executive and donor class. The kind of event where deals got made between the appetizer course and the main, where being seen mattered as much as being capable, sometimes more. Brielle had avoided it for 3 consecutive years because she had enough going on without needing to spend $400 a plate to make small talk with people who already knew who she was and had already decided how they felt about her. But the board had been pushing her to show up more. Visibility matters, Raymond Holt had told her at the last quarterly review, using his reasonable voice, the one that made condescension sound like strategy. The company needs a face that's out in the world, Brielle. Relationships are infrastructure. She had nodded and said she understood because she did understand. She just also understood what Raymond actually meant, which was that he wanted her to be the kind of CEO who photographed well at benefits and played golf with the right people and made the investors feel comfortable. The kind of CEO who made everyone in the room feel like they already knew him. Brielle was not that kind of CEO. She was the kind who could rebuild your data architecture from the ground up in 72 hours, who had memorized every clause in every contract her company had ever signed, who had a reputation among her engineers for being the most technically precise person in any room she entered. She was also the kind who got described in profile pieces as formidable and intimidating in ways that were never quite a compliment, and she had learned early that formidable was what journalists wrote when they couldn't figure out how to call a woman brilliant without sounding surprised. She moved into the room. For the first 20 minutes, it went fine. She found Marcus Webb, her VP of Partnerships, near the bar, and they talked strategy for a few minutes, the comfortable shorthand of two people who had worked together long enough to speak in half sentences. She shook hands with a city councilman whose name she blanked on, but whose face she recognized, exchanged pleasantries with the director of a nonprofit they had partnered with for an apprenticeship program. Standard Gala behavior. Manageable. Then Marcus got pulled away by someone, and she was standing alone with her sparkling water. And that was when she noticed the table. Not directly. She noticed it the way you notice a conversation that pauses when you walk past. A certain quality of silence, a shift in body language, that registers in your peripheral vision before your conscious mind processes it. 4 women at a high top near the entrance to the cocktail area. Expensively dressed. One of them she recognized as Courtney Vass, wife of Douglas Vass, who sat on the board of 2 Chicago area financial institutions and also, incidentally, on the advisory council of the Meridian Foundation. Courtney was in her mid-40s, blonde in the way that required significant maintenance, and had the kind of smile that only appeared when it was performing. Brielle didn't stop walking. She kept her pace even, and her chin level, and her eyes moving around the room like she was looking for someone. Which she was. She was looking for literally anyone else to talk to, but she caught it anyway, the tail end of it. Built that company herself, which, God, good for her, but did anyone give her a mirror? Quiet laughter. Not the discreet kind. Brielle kept walking. Her jaw tightened. That was the only thing that moved. She had heard variations of this her entire adult life. In college, in her first job at a fintech startup where she had been the only black woman on the engineering team and one of the few people in the office who ever ate lunch at their desk. In the early fundraising years, when she had pitched to 43 investors before she found 2 willing to write checks, and she had sat through enough post-rejection conversations to know that not the right fit covered a lot of different meanings. She had developed a callus over it, or thought she had. The callus had limits. She found a quieter section of the room near one of the window banks and stood there with her drink, looking out at the city lights spread across the lakefront. From this height, Chicago looked clean, organized, elegant in the way that distance makes everything look elegant. Her phone buzzed. A text from her operations director, Danny, asking a question about a server migration timeline. Brielle answered it. It took about 90 seconds, one of the advantages of knowing her own systems inside out. And by the time she put her phone away, the room had rearranged itself slightly, and she was no longer alone in her corner of it. About 10 feet away, a man was doing the same thing she had been doing. Standing at the window with a drink, looking out, not performing. He was white, maybe early 30s, wide in the shoulders in the way that came from actual labor rather than a gym membership. Dress shirt and jacket that fit well enough, but not like they were his usual clothes. No tie. Or he had removed it already, which honestly was the right call. He had the slightly uncomfortable bearing of someone attending a formal event on behalf of someone else's idea, like he was doing the room a favor by being present. He glanced over and caught her looking, and she had the option of looking away but didn't take it. "Is it weird that the view is more interesting than the party?" he asked. "No," she said. "The party is less interesting than most things." He smiled at that. Not a polished smile, a little lopsided, a little like it surprised him. "Nolan Pierce," he said, and offered a hand. Brielle Maddox. They shook. His grip was firm but not performative. "You look like you're waiting for something," he said. "I'm waiting for enough time to pass that leaving doesn't feel rude." He laughed. A real one. "Same. I'm supposed to be here for the awards portion. After that, I figure I've done my civic duty." "You're one of the award recipients?" "Community leadership. My neighborhood association's been working on a job training partnership with the city for about 2 years. Someone nominated the program." He said it simply, without the embarrassed deflection some people used when they talked about being recognized, but also without the swollen self-importance that was more common in this room. He just said it the way it was. "That's a real thing," Brielle said. "The kind of thing this foundation is actually supposed to be about." "You say that like you're not sure they know that." I say that because I'm not sure they know that. Something shifted in his expression, a kind of recognition, like she had said something he had been thinking for a while. What do you do? He asked. She told him. She watched for the reaction, which varied. Some people became differently attentive when they found out, swapping one set of assumptions for another. Nolan just nodded, interested but not recalibrated. You started it from scratch? From a 2-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park and money I borrowed from my mother. How long ago? 8 years. He was quiet for a moment, and she appreciated that he didn't immediately say something congratulatory in the reaching way people did when they wanted credit for appreciating her achievement. He just absorbed it. That's a long time to build something, he said finally. It is. They stood there a little longer, and it was one of those rare conversational moments at a party where the silence wasn't uncomfortable, where two people have simply run out of the need to fill space and are fine with that. Brielle found herself relaxing slightly, the tightness in her shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch. Then someone tapped a microphone at the front of the room, and the program began, and she and Nolan drifted in separate directions to find their tables. The dinner portion was 45 minutes long and involved a chicken dish that was technically edible and a wine that was technically a wine. Brielle was seated at a table with Marcus and 3 people she knew only well enough to be polite to, including a woman named Patricia Lund, who ran some kind of consulting firm and spent the entire meal talking about her recent trip to Reykjavik in a way that made Reykjavik sound like a personality trait. The award ceremony came after the dinner plates were cleared. The foundation's executive director, a trim man named Gerald Okoro, who had the delivery of someone who had given this speech many times, introduced the year's honorees one by one. There were 5 total: a high school principal from Bronzeville, a doctor running a community clinic in Pilsen, a youth soccer coach from Logan Square, a retired firefighter, and Nolan Pierce, described as the organizer behind a workforce development partnership that had placed 230 people in skilled trades jobs over the past 2 years. When Nolan came up to receive the award, he was brief. He thanked the foundation, thanked his neighbors, and said the only reason any of it had worked was because the people in his neighborhood had been willing to trust the process long enough to see it through. He sat back down before anyone expected him to, and the applause was genuine. Brielle found herself clapping longer than she needed to. After the ceremony, the room dissolved back into cocktail hour, and this was when things came apart. She had gone to get a club soda from the bar when she heard her name. Not directed at her, not addressed to her. Her name in a conversation happening nearby, between people who didn't know how close she was or didn't care. She turned her head enough to place it. A cluster of 5 or 6 people, cocktails in hand, the kind of loose social circle that forms after a few drinks. She recognized 2 faces, Courtney Vass from before, and next to her, Douglas Vass himself, portly and silver-haired, with the kind of permanent half-smirk that telegraphed that he considered himself funnier than the room had confirmed. Douglas sat on the board of Hartwell Capital, which happened to hold a minority investment in Luminary Systems. He had been largely absent from operations and had no particular interest in the company beyond the return, which had been performing well, which meant he had no particular leverage, or she had thought he had no leverage. "I'm telling you, I saw the SEC filing," someone was saying, a man she didn't recognize. "The numbers don't add up. Something's off." "The numbers are fine," said another voice, dismissive. "The real problem is just optics. You can't send her to a conference in Singapore like that and expect—" "Like what exactly?" Courtney's voice, warm with amusement. And then Douglas Vass laughed, a short, self-satisfied sound, and said, "I mean, look at her. She walked in here tonight looking like she got dressed in the dark. People don't want to see that representing a major tech company. The investors don't want to see that." More laughter. Low, comfortable. The kind of laughter that assumed it wasn't being overheard. Brielle did not move. This was the thing nobody told you about moments like this. Not in the business books, not in the leadership seminars, not in any of the interviews she had given where she talked about resilience and staying grounded. Nobody told you that the moment would feel less like an attack and more like a cold front. Not hot, not sharp. Cold. A kind of stillness that came with the realization that all the work, all the years, all the structures she had built were not enough to make her safe from this. that she was still standing in the same room as people who could look at everything she had accomplished and see only what she weighed. She turned away from the bar. She needed air. She needed to move. She needed about 300 miles between herself and this room. She was almost to the hallway when she heard it get worse. Honestly, I heard the board's already talking about bringing in someone else to front the company, Douglas continued, louder now, either bolder with the drink or indifferent to being heard. Keep her in the back. Let her do the technical work. Find someone who's actually going to, what's the phrase, project confidence. Someone who photographs better, said the unrecognized voice, and this got the biggest laugh yet. Brielle stopped walking. She was standing in the middle of the ballroom floor, and she had stopped moving, and she could feel the shift in attention, the way conversations nearby quieted slightly as people sensed something was happening. She was aware of her own face and the effort it was taking to keep it controlled, and she was aware of the way her hands had closed around her clutch. And she was aware that she was not going to cry in this room. She had made that decision years ago, and it was not up for renegotiation tonight. What she did not have a decision about was the heat rising up her neck and into her face, or the way her chest felt like it had been replaced with something solid and heavy, or the fact that she was 40 feet from the nearest exit and the space between felt like 40 miles. A waiter stepped around her. Two women in evening gowns passed close enough to make eye contact and then looked away, not quickly enough to pretend they hadn't heard anything. And then someone stepped up beside her, not coming at her, just arriving alongside her, casually, like it was unremarkable. Nolan Pierce. He was holding a club soda and looking out at the room with the same unhurried expression she had seen at the window earlier. He didn't look at her right away. He just stood there, occupying the same space, which was, she would think about this later, exactly what she needed. Not a rescue, not a reaction, just presence. Just a person standing next to her like it was normal and fine, and she was allowed to be exactly where she was. "Good view from here, too," he said, quietly. She looked at him. He met her eyes, and his held something direct and steady and clearly pissed off, though none of it had escaped into his expression yet. He had heard it. She could see that he had heard all of it. He was choosing, with some visible effort, not to walk over there and say something irreversible. "You don't have to do this," she said, keeping her voice low. "I know. I've been handling this my entire career. I'm fine." "I know you're fine," he said, like the statement did not require debate. "I'm standing here because I want to stand here. You can tell me to leave if you want." She didn't tell him to leave. They stood there together for a moment, and the laughter from Douglas Vass's circle had quieted some, the way a fire quiets when nobody feeds it attention. A few people nearby had noticed Nolan's position next to her and had apparently recalibrated the social calculus of the moment. "I want to be clear," Nolan said, still keeping his voice private between them, "that what that man said was garbage. Not in a polite way. Just actually garbage. He's on the board of a firm that holds equity in my company," she said. "Okay. Which means I can't respond to him the way I want to." "What do you want to do?" She thought about it. "Walk out, head high, take a car home. Send a very carefully worded email to my legal team in the morning. That's better than what I was going to suggest." Something cracked in the armor of the night, just slightly. Not a laugh. She wasn't at a laugh yet, but the closest she'd come. "What were you going to suggest?" she asked. "Nothing that would hold up in a professional environment," he said. "Come on, I'll walk you to the lobby." The lobby was quieter. The marble floors and the lower ceilings brought the ambient noise down, and Brielle exhaled fully for the first time since she had stepped out of the elevator 2 hours ago. She found a bench near one of the lobby's structural pillars and sat down, and after a second's hesitation, Nolan sat down a reasonable distance away, not crowding her, just close enough to be present. "You've been doing this event long enough to have an exit strategy?" he asked. "This is the first time I've been here," she said. "Seriously?" "I know I should come to these things. I've been told I should come to these things." He was aware of how tired she sounded and didn't care. "But this," she gestured loosely toward the ballroom behind them, "is exactly why I don't." He was quiet for a moment. "The guy who said that, you said he's on a board connected to your company?" "Investment firm, minority stake. He doesn't have operational authority, but he has relationships with people who do." People like who? She looked at him. It was a sharper question than she had expected. Why? Because what he said about the board already talking, right? That wasn't bar talk. That sounded like something he knew. The cold front was back, settling differently now, more specific. I've been managing board dynamics for 8 years, she said. If something was being organized against me, I would know about it. Probably, Nolan said, but maybe not. He shook his head slightly. I'm sorry, that's none of my business. I don't know your company. No, keep going, she said. Something about his directness had the quality of useful information. What made it sound different to you? He thought about it, turning the glass of club soda in his hands. He said, the board's already talking, not people think or there's been conversation, already, like it's in progress. And he said it in a room full of people, which means either he's drunk and stupid or he doesn't care if she hears it. He paused. Which means he maybe wants you to hear it. She sat with that. Psychological warfare, she said. I'm a maintenance supervisor, not a strategist. But where I come from, when someone talks loud enough for you to overhear them, it's because they want a reaction. They want me rattled. They want you to come into Monday morning already on the defensive. He shrugged. That's my read, for whatever it's worth, which is probably not much, coming from someone who didn't know what a term sheet was until about 4 years ago. How do you know what a term sheet is now? My daughter. She's 10 and she reads everything. She found a business book in the library and decided to explain it to me over breakfast for about 3 weeks straight. Something softened in his face when he mentioned her. Not performed softness, actual softness, the kind you couldn't manufacture. She's convinced she's going to run a company someday. What kind of company? Changes monthly. Last month it was a bakery. This month it's aerospace. Brielle found herself almost smiling. Smart range. She's something. He said it simply, matter-of-factly, with the quiet certainty of a person who has organized a significant portion of their life around a single conviction. She looked at him more carefully than she had earlier in the evening. He wasn't handsome in any assembled way. His face was too lived in for that, with a jaw that looked like it had met something solid at some point and a tiredness around the eyes that was structural rather than occasional. But he was present. That was the word she kept circling back to. He was present in a way that very few people she encountered managed to be, particularly in rooms like this one, where everyone was simultaneously performing and evaluating. Thank you, she said, for coming over. You didn't have to do that. I know. You keep saying that. Because you keep pointing it out like it's surprising. He looked at her evenly. It shouldn't be surprising. What happened in there was ugly. Someone should have said something before I got there. The fact that nobody did? That's the more interesting problem. She nodded, because there was nothing to argue with in that. They sat in the lobby for another 20 minutes, talking about nothing consequential. The city, the Foundation's actual programs, whether the string quartet had been playing in tune, they disagreed on this, his daughter's current obsession with the history of flight. It was the kind of conversation that happened when two people had already established, without discussing it, that they didn't need to impress each other, that the space between them was just space. When her car arrived, she stood and shook his hand. Brielle Maddox, he said, like he was reading it off a plaque. I'll remember that. Nolan Pierce, she said back. Community leadership. He smiled, the lopsided one. Get home safe and call your legal team in the morning. Already drafting the email, she said. She walked out through the lobby doors and into the cool October air and let it hit her face for a moment before she got in the car. The driver pulled away from the curb, and Chicago unspooled past the windows in its nighttime version. The bridges lit, the lake invisible but present, the grid of streets that had been the same grid her entire life, and still sometimes surprised her with their stubborn familiarity. She opened her phone and looked at the note she had typed in the car on the way over, the list she made for every professional event. Who to talk to, what to avoid, exit by 10. She deleted the note and opened a new one. Douglas Vass. Monitor. Already talking. Follow up. Talk to Danny and Marcus first thing Monday. She paused, thumbs hovering. Then she added, at the bottom, NP. Community Award. Workforce Dev Program. Genuine. Follow up. She stared at that last line for a second. Then she put her phone in her bag and watched the city go past outside and let herself feel, just for the length of the drive home, the particular exhaustion of a woman who had spent the whole evening being the only person in any room who was doing two jobs at once: the job she'd been invited there to do, and the job of simply existing in the room without apologizing for it. It was the second job that wore her out. It always was. She got home at 11:17, kicked off her heels at the door, let them lie where they landed on the hardwood, made herself a cup of tea she barely drank, and sat at her kitchen counter with her laptop open, pulling up the company's latest board communications dashboard. Nothing unusual in the inbox. Nothing flagged. Everything where it was supposed to be. She closed the laptop, poured the tea down the sink, went to bed. But she lay there for a long time in the dark of her apartment, with the curtains slightly open and the ambient light of the city pushing through in that low orange glow that was almost comfortable if you had grown up with it, and she turned over Nolan's words in her mind the way you turn over a stone to see what lives underneath. He said, "Already." Not, "There's been conversation." Already. Like it's in progress. She stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow was Sunday. She would let it be Sunday. She would run. She would call her mother, which she had been putting off for 2 weeks because her mother had strong opinions about everything and the energy for 3 calls worth of conversation in every single call. She would order Thai food and eat it over the sink like a person with no standards, because she had been eating at conference tables and restaurant dinners for 3 days straight, and her body was tired of performing appetites it didn't have. She would let it be Sunday. And on Monday morning, she would walk back into Luminary Systems, and she would do what she had been doing for 8 years, which was everything. She would be everywhere the company needed her to be. She would read every document and attend every meeting and make every decision that was hers to make. She would do it with a jawline her mother called strong, and a mind that had outrun every room it had ever entered, and a company that she had built with her own hands out of nothing but time and stubbornness, and the absolute refusal to accept the version of herself that other people were so eager to hand her. She would do all of that. And somewhere in the city, a maintenance supervisor with a lopsided smile and a 10-year-old daughter interested in aerospace was doing whatever it was he did on Saturday nights after winning a community leadership award. Probably sleeping. Probably the practical sleep of a person who had learned to rest when they could because the work would be there in the morning. She didn't know him. Not really. One conversation in a hotel lobby was not knowing someone, but it was enough to know that he had meant what he said, and that in a room full of people who had seen what happened and looked away, that meant something. She wasn't sure yet what it meant. She closed her eyes and let the city's light do what it did, which was settle over everything like it always had, indifferent and permanent, the same orange glow it had been for as long as she could remember, all the way back to when she was a girl in her mother's apartment on the south side dreaming about something she didn't have a name for yet. She had built the name for it herself. That was the part nobody could take. Monday arrived the way Mondays always did, too fast and without apology. Brielle was at her desk by 7:15, which was 45 minutes before anyone else on the executive floor usually showed up, which was by design. She liked the building in those early minutes, the hum of the HVAC, the city still assembling itself outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. The particular quality of silence that belonged to a space full of working machines and no people yet, like a theater before the cast arrived. She had her coffee, her laptop, and a yellow legal pad that her assistant kept trying to replace with a tablet, and that she kept refusing because she thought better on paper and she was not interested in optimizing that away. She also had the note she had made in the car on Saturday night, transferred now to the top of the legal pad in her own handwriting. Douglas Vass. Monitor. Already talking. Follow up. Talk to Danny and Marcus. She had spent Sunday the way she planned. The run. The phone call with her mother, which ran 53 minutes and covered her mother's neighbor's hip surgery, the state of the Democratic Party, and whether Brielle was eating enough, in approximately that order. The Thai food over the sink. She had not thought about the gala, or told herself she hadn't, which was not quite the same thing. Now she drew a line under Douglas Vass's name and wrote 3 words beneath it. Who does he talk to? Marcus Webb arrived at 7:58, which was early for him. He dropped into the chair across from her desk without waiting to be invited, which was a habit she had long since given up correcting. I heard about Saturday, he said. She looked up. Heard from who? Patricia Lund. She texted me Sunday morning. He had the expression of a man carrying information he wasn't sure how to hand over. She said it got ugly. It was manageable. Brielle. It was ugly, she said, and manageable. Both things. She set down her pen. What exactly did Patricia tell you? That Vass was running his mouth, that he said something about the board looking to… Marcus stopped. Started again. Looking to restructure leadership optics. Restructure leadership optics, she repeated. That's a very delicate way to say what he said. What did he say? She told him. Not the softened version, the actual words as close as she could reconstruct them. Marcus's expression went through several phases, ending somewhere around controlled fury. He said that in a room full of people. He said it loudly enough that I wasn't the only one who heard it. And he specifically mentioned the board. He said the board's already talking. She watched Marcus's face. Which is what I need you to tell me about. Marcus was quiet for a beat too long. That beat told her something. Talk, she said. It's not… Look, it's not a coup. It's not organized like that. But there have been conversations. He shifted in the chair. He was not a man who was comfortable being on the wrong side of something, which was one of the reasons she had trusted him for 6 years. Holt has been making noise. The usual thing, that you need a higher public profile, that the company needs a face that plays well in external media. He's been saying it to a few of the other board members. Which ones? Carver. Maybe Strauss. I'm not sure about Strauss. She wrote the names down. Raymond Holt, she knew. He had been on the board since the Series B and had always been pleasant in a way she had never completely trusted. Carver was newer, brought in through a secondary investment round 18 months ago. Strauss she had personally recruited, which made it worse. This is more organized than Holt making noise, she said. I don't know that it's organized. I think it's more like… He searched for it. Convergent interests. A few people who individually have decided you're a liability and haven't compared notes yet. Or maybe have started to. There's a difference between a few board members gossiping and an actual move against my position. Yes, Marcus said. And I think right now it's still the first thing. But Saturday, if Vass is talking about it at a charity gala, it's not as contained as it was. She sat back in her chair and looked at the legal pad. The names. The lines connecting them that she was only now beginning to draw. How long have you known about Holt? She asked. The pause again. 6 weeks? She looked at him. I was trying to assess whether it was real before I brought it to you, he said. I didn't want to… 6 weeks, Marcus. I know. 6 weeks is a long time for something like this to build without me knowing. He didn't argue with that. To his credit, he didn't try to reframe it or make it smaller than it was. He just sat with it, which was what she needed him to do. I'm telling you now, he said quietly. You are. She tapped the pen against the pad once. Don't sit on things again. Whatever it is, however incomplete, I need to know. I can work with incomplete. I can't work with blind. Understood. Good. She turned to a fresh page. Now let's figure out what we actually know. They worked for 2 hours, and by the time the rest of the executive team began filtering in, she had a clearer picture. Still incomplete, still more impression than evidence, but cleaner. Holt had been the most vocal. His concern, as best as Marcus could reconstruct it from secondhand conversations, was framed entirely around brand and investor optics, not performance. Luminary Systems' numbers were strong. Q3 revenue was up 14%. Their enterprise contract pipeline was the healthiest it had ever been. Nobody was questioning the fundamentals. What they were questioning was her. Specifically, the version of her that showed up in photographs, on stages, in the kind of glossy media moments that were not her natural habitat and that she had never prioritized because she had been too busy running an actual company. It was, in its way, the most clarifying kind of threat. It had nothing to do with what she had built or how well she ran it. It was entirely about the fact that certain people in certain rooms looked at her and wanted her to take up less space. She had been fighting that her entire career. She had just believed, with the particular naivete that comes from years of wins, that she had outgrown the fight. She had not outgrown it. The fight had just found a better room. The thing about a company with 2,000 employees is that it breathes. Not metaphorically, literally. The HVAC, the servers, the foot traffic through the corridors, the noise levels that rise and fall with the rhythm of shifts and meetings and lunch hours. Brielle had learned to feel it the way you learn to feel a building you've lived in for years. She knew when something was off, even when she couldn't name it yet. On Wednesday, she felt it off. Not dramatically. Just a slightly different quality to the room when she walked through the main engineering floor on her afternoon circuit. A pause in a conversation that was a beat too long. Two engineers from the infrastructure team who looked at their screens with a little too much focus when she passed. Small things, the kind that didn't mean anything individually and meant a lot collectively. She stopped at the end of the floor and looked back at it. The rows of workstations. The whiteboards covered in system architecture diagrams. The people who had built the actual machinery of her company, most of them in their late 20s and early 30s, most of them hired because she had specifically looked for people who were excellent at their jobs and indifferent to politics. She didn't say anything. She just noted it and kept walking. That afternoon, she had a facilities coordination meeting, the building management company doing their quarterly walkthrough, checking systems, flagging any maintenance or infrastructure items before the winter. Luminary occupied 3 floors of a converted warehouse building in the West Loop, and the arrangement involved a shared facilities team that handled mechanical and technical systems across all the building's tenants. She was not supposed to attend the facilities meeting. Danny usually handled it. But Danny was out with the doctor's appointment, and Brielle had blocked 2 hours she didn't know what to do with, and she found herself walking down to the 3rd-floor conference room where the building facilities supervisor was supposed to meet with whoever was available from Luminary's ops side. The building facilities supervisor was Nolan Pierce. She stopped in the doorway. He was already at the table, a clipboard in front of him and a printed floor plan of Luminary's 3 floors spread across the surface, and he looked up at precisely the moment she appeared in the door. His expression ran through surprise, recalibration, and something that might have been amusement in about 2 seconds flat. "Ms. Maddox," he said. "You work in this building," she said. "I work in this building," he confirmed. She came in and sat down across from him. It was a small conference room, used mostly for vendor calls and the occasional HR meeting that needed to be off the main floor, the kind of room that didn't try very hard. "How long?" she asked. 3 years. I took over as facilities supervisor for the building when the previous one retired." He looked at her with the same direct quality from Saturday. "I didn't know it was your company. I knew the building had a tech tenant on floors 4 through 6, but I hadn't connected it." 3 years, she said. "We've never crossed paths. I'm usually in the sublevels or the mechanical rooms. I don't spend a lot of time on your floors unless something needs attention." He glanced at the floor plan. "There's a heating irregularity on your server room that's been borderline for about a month. I flagged it to your ops coordinator, but I'm not sure it got escalated." "It didn't. What kind of irregularity?" He walked her through it. The specifics were technical enough that most people in her position would have nodded through them and passed it off to an engineer. Brielle asked 3 clarifying questions, which she could see registered with him, and by the end of it they had agreed on a repair schedule that would address the issue before the first cold front hit and the heating system's load increased. They should have wrapped up at that point. The meeting was over. She had a 4:30 call. She didn't leave, and neither did he. "How's Monday treating you?" he asked, and the easy informality of it was so different from how everyone else in this building talked to her that it almost made her laugh. "It's Wednesday," she said. "I know. I meant the Monday that was inside your head when you left the hotel Saturday night." She considered that. It was a perceptive reframe, the kind that required actually paying attention to a person rather than their title. "Complicated," she said. "I've been doing a lot of reading between lines. The thing I said about already. Did that turn out to be anything?" She looked at him for a moment, assessing how much to say. He had no stake in any of it. He had no connection to the company's inner workings beyond the literal infrastructure of the floors it occupied. He was functionally exactly the wrong person to be having this conversation with. "Some things are adding up in ways I don't like," she said. "I don't have enough pieces yet." He nodded, didn't push. "How's your daughter?" she asked, the change in subject more genuine than deflective. Something changed in his posture. Not a dramatic shift, just a loosening of something that had been held in. She's good. She had a science fair presentation yesterday, made a working model of a wind turbine out of a box fan, some dowels, and about 45 minutes of my power tools. Did she win? Second place. She's furious. The kid who won made a volcano, which she considers an inferior concept. She's not wrong, he smiled. That's exactly what she said. What's her name? Cora. Brielle repeated it in her head. It fit somehow. She didn't know why. She didn't know the girl at all. But the name sounded like a person who would be angry about losing to a volcano. It's just the two of you? She asked, and then immediately wondered if that was too personal. People asked that question and it could land sideways. He didn't seem bothered by it. Yeah, her mother and I split when Cora was 3. She lives with me full time. Her mom is in Denver. They talk on the phone, but... He moved his hand slightly, a gesture that covered what words weren't going to. It's mostly us. That's a lot. It's what it is. Not self-pity, just fact. She's easy to build a life around. She has opinions about everything, which means there's never nothing to talk about at dinner. Brielle thought about her own dinners, the takeout containers, the open laptop, the habit she had developed of eating while she read, because sitting with food and no task felt like waste. You should eat dinner sometime, he said, and she realized she had been silent long enough for it to be visible. I eat dinner. At a table? With no screens? Occasionally. That tracks, he said, and there was no judgment in it, just recognition. You seem like someone who stopped having meals and started having refueling intervals. She opened her mouth to argue and then closed it. That is a very specific read for someone who's known me for one conversation and a facilities meeting, she said. I'm around buildings all day, he said. You learn to see how things are actually functioning versus how they're supposed to be functioning. People aren't that different from systems. She stared at him. That's either very insightful or very strange. Probably both. He started rolling up the floor plan. 4:30 call? She glanced at her watch. 4:18. Yes? I'll put the work order in for the server room repair. You'll have it in writing by end of day. He stood, tucked the clipboard under his arm. Take care of yourself, Miss Maddox. Brielle, she said. He paused. If you're going to tell me to eat dinner, you can use my name. The lopsided smile appeared. Brielle, he said, like he was trying it out and finding it fit. I'll see you around the building. Lump. She thought about that meeting more than she should have over the following week. Not in a complicated way. Or she told herself it wasn't complicated. It was just unusual. Nolan Pierce occupied a completely different register than most of the people she spent time with, which was not a revelation worth examining too hard, except that it kept surfacing. She would be in a board prep meeting, and something someone said would remind her of the way he had told her that she had replaced meals with refueling intervals, and the accuracy of it would hit her again in the middle of someone's slide deck. She called her mother on Thursday, which was unusual because they had just talked Sunday, and this was also something she didn't examine too closely. You sound different, her mother said immediately, because her mother had the radar of someone who had been paying very close attention to Brielle Maddox for 31 years. I'm fine, Mom. I didn't say you weren't fine. I said you sound different. Different and fine aren't exclusive. I went to the Meridian Gala on Saturday. A pause. The one you've been skipping? Yes. And? She told her mother about it. Not everything, not the specifics of what Douglas Vass had said, because her mother would have feelings about that would consume the entire call, but the general shape of the evening, the room, the award ceremony, the man who had come to stand beside her in the lobby. Her mother was quiet for a moment after that. What does he look like? She asked. Mom, I'm just asking. That is not the relevant detail. I'm getting old, Brielle. Let me have something. Brielle pinched the bridge of her nose. He looks like someone who works with his hands and spends a lot of time outdoors. He has a 10-year-old daughter named Cora who is angry about losing a science fair to a volcano. Her mother made a sound that was not quite a word. What? Brielle said. Nothing. That's a nice thing is all. Someone who shows up when they don't have to. That's not as common as it should be. I know. You going to see him again? He works in my building. Another pause, this one with a different quality. Her mother said. Don't me. I'm not humming you, I'm just thinking. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, her mother said, that you spent a very long time building something that nobody could take from you. And I wonder if maybe it's time to think about the things that aren't about building. Brielle didn't say anything to that. You're allowed to have a life, baby, her mother said, and her voice was quiet and careful the way it got when she was saying something she had been holding for a while. The company doesn't replace that. It never was supposed to. I have a life. You have a career. There's a difference. She sat with that after she hung up. She sat with it for a long time, at the kitchen counter where the invitation had been 6 weeks ago, in the apartment that was well-furnished and clean and entirely, thoroughly, professionally organized, with no evidence of anyone living in it except her. The following Tuesday, she was passing through the sub-level parking garage on her way to a vendor meeting when she noticed the door to the building's mechanical room was propped open. Not unusual. The facilities team was often down there, but something on the floor outside the door caught her eye. A manila folder, closed, with the corner of what looked like a spreadsheet visible. She almost kept walking. She was 12 minutes from a meeting and her mind was already halfway through the agenda. She stopped. She went back and picked up the folder. Inside was a printed spreadsheet. Vendor billing records, from the look of it. Building management accounts, organized by floor and tenant. She scanned it the way she always scanned documents, the way her brain had been trained to pick up on anomalies, and she found one in about 20 seconds. A line item for IT infrastructure services billed to a third-party vendor account credited against Luminary Systems maintenance costs. The dollar amount was not large, maybe $4,000, but the vendor code was one she didn't recognize, which meant it wasn't one of their standard contractors, which meant something had been charged to her company's account by a vendor she had never approved. She heard footsteps and looked up. Nolan came around the corner of the mechanical room door, stopped when he saw her, and looked down at the folder in her hands. That fell out of my bag, he said. I didn't realize. Where did this come from? She said. He crossed the space between them and looked at what she was looking at. He was close enough that she could see where his afternoon had put lines of tiredness around his eyes. I found it on Thursday when I was doing a systems audit, he said, his voice lower now. Reconciling the billing accounts against actual vendor usage. That code, the third-party IT services line, it doesn't match any contractor I've ever authorized for this building. But it's been billing consistently for 8 months. She looked up at him. Against my company's account specifically? Yours and one other. A financial services firm on the second floor, but the amounts charged to your account are higher. 8 months. Consistent billing. A vendor code nobody had authorized. This is either a billing error, she said, or it's not. Yeah, he said. I was going to escalate it to building management today, but I didn't know if... He stopped, reconsidered. I didn't know if it connected to anything else, given what you said last week. She looked at the spreadsheet again. $4,000 was not enough to damage the company, but it was enough to indicate a mechanism, something set up and running quietly, testing whether anyone was watching. Does anyone else know you found this? She asked. No, I was going to write it up this afternoon. Don't, she said. Not yet. She looked at him and said something she had not planned to say and had not, until this moment, fully assessed. Can I make a copy of this? He looked at her for a beat. Then he said, yes. She folded the spreadsheet carefully and tucked it into her bag. Her hands were steady, but her mind was running fast, pulling threads, connecting the conversation at the gala to the names on her legal pad, to the uneasy feeling on the engineering floor to this folder in a parking garage. Nolan, she said. Yeah. Don't tell anyone you found this. Not yet. Not until I've had a chance to look at it with my finance team. Okay. He paused. Is this... He stopped again, choosing the question carefully. Are you safe? Like, professionally? It was such a direct question that it caught her off guard. Not in a bad way, just in the way that direct things sometimes do when you're not used to receiving them. I don't know yet, she said honestly. He nodded like that was a reasonable answer to a reasonable question. Okay, let me know if there's anything else you need from the building systems. If someone's using vendor codes they shouldn't be, there might be a paper trail in the mechanical records too. She looked at him. You'd look into that? You're a tenant in this building, he said, with a simplicity that made her want to argue and not be able to. It's my job to make sure the building's systems aren't being used against the people in it. She held his gaze for a second. Then she nodded and turned and walked toward the garage exit. She made it to her meeting with 1 minute to spare and sat through 45 minutes of vendor presentations with the spreadsheet in her bag and $4,000 worth of questions forming in the back of her mind that were going to require significantly larger answers. Outside, Chicago was doing what it did in November, pressing down gray and cold, the lake somewhere beyond the buildings pushing its cold weight into the air. The city had been here before her and would be here after, indifferent and massive, full of people who were surviving various versions of the same thing she was navigating, the gap between what they had built and what someone else wanted to take. She had her company. She had her name on the door. She also had, folded in her bag, the first piece of actual evidence that something was being done in the dark. And she had, standing in a parking garage with a clipboard and a paper trail he hadn't needed to show her, a man who had now, twice, showed up when he didn't have to. She was starting to understand that this was not coincidence. This was character. And character, in her experience, was the rarest thing in any room. The spreadsheet had a twin. Brielle found it 4 days after the parking garage, buried in a vendor reconciliation file that her finance director, a meticulous woman named Sylvia Cho, had flagged as routine and set aside. It wasn't routine. It was the same unauthorized vendor code, this time routed through a separate billing channel, building utilities rather than IT services, and attached to a contract amendment that bore a signature line with a name Brielle didn't recognize. She sat with both documents spread across her desk for an hour before she called Sylvia in and closed the door. I need you to trace this vendor code back as far as it goes, she said. Every invoice, every payment record, every account it's touched. And I need you to do it without running it through the normal reporting chain. Sylvia looked at the documents. She was 51, had been in finance for 26 years, and had the particular stillness of someone who had learned that the most alarming information usually arrived looking ordinary. How far back do you think it goes? She asked. 8 months at minimum, possibly longer. What am I looking for? I don't know yet. That's the problem. Brielle tapped the signature line on the contract amendment. Start with this name. I want to know if it's a real person. It was not a real person. Sylvia confirmed that within 24 hours, the name traced to a Shell LLC, registered in Delaware with no physical address, no employees on record, and a registered agent that was a law firm specializing in corporate privacy structures. The LLC had been formed 11 months ago. Its only apparent function was to receive and forward payments. Brielle read Sylvia's report 3 times. Then she locked it in her desk drawer and did something she had been avoiding for 2 weeks because she knew what the conversation would require of her. She called Raymond Holt. Holt answered on the second ring, which meant he had been expecting her to call, which meant he already knew she was looking. That told her something. Brielle, he said, with the warmth of a man who had been rehearsing warmth. I've been meaning to reach out. How are you feeling about the Vantage Conference prep? We're getting close. The Vantage Capital Investor Conference was Luminary Systems' biggest public event of the year. 3 days in mid-December in downtown Chicago, attended by current and prospective investors, enterprise clients, and press. Brielle had been preparing for it for 2 months. It was, under normal circumstances, her strongest arena. She ran the presentations herself, knew the technology at a granular level that no one else on the executive team could match, and had a track record of walking into rooms full of skeptics and walking out having converted most of them. Under current circumstances, it was also the most obvious point of attack. The conference is on track, she said. I'm calling about something else. Of course, what do you need? The ease of it, the uncomplicated availability. She recognized it as the performance of a man who believed he was still ahead of her. She kept her voice even. I want to do a board check-in before the conference. Not a formal session, just a call. Get a temperature read on where everyone is going in. That's a great idea, Holt said, with the enthusiasm of agreement that cost him nothing. I'll reach out to the others and find a time. I'd also like to talk about a vendor audit that my finance team has been conducting. Nothing alarming, routine cleanup before year end. But there are some line items I want to walk through with the full board before we go into a major investor event. A pause. Brief. Almost nothing. But she had been listening for it. Of course, he said. Send me the details and I'll make sure it's on the agenda. She thanked him and ended the call and sat for a moment in the silence of her office. He knew, she was certain now, not what she knew, not yet, but that she was looking. The pause had told her. A man with nothing to hide doesn't pause when you say routine vendor audit. She wrote one more name on her legal pad. Holt. Aware. Then she called Marcus. The problem with having a target on your back is that it changes how you move through rooms. Brielle noticed it in herself over the following week. A recalibration in how she read conversations. A new layer of attention to who said what, in whose presence, to the timing of emails and the texture of silences in meetings. She did not like this version of herself. She was a builder. She had spent 8 years learning to run toward problems rather than watching for them to come from behind. But this was what it was. She managed it. What she could not entirely manage was the way it was starting to exhaust her. She found herself in the building's sub-level break room on a Thursday afternoon. Not her floor, not her usual space, but she had needed to be somewhere that wasn't surrounded by people watching her manage it. She was sitting at a folding table with a cup of bad coffee from a machine that had seen better decades, and she had her phone face down on the table and was just sitting. Nolan found her there, or walked into the break room not knowing she was there, and found her there, which was not quite the same thing, but produced the same result. He looked at the coffee cup. "That machine is not good," he said. "I know." "The third floor has a decent espresso setup." "I know. I'm avoiding the third floor." He put down the kit bag he was carrying. Tools of some kind, she had stopped tracking what he carried around the building, and went to the machine and looked at it with the expression of a man who had made peace with what it was. He fed it $1 and got something dark and questionable in a paper cup and sat down across from her. "Bad week?" he asked. "Complicated week." "Is there a difference?" She thought about it. Bad is when things are going wrong. Complicated is when things are going wrong and you can see why, and you still can't stop them fast enough. He drank from the paper cup, made a face, kept drinking. "The vendor thing?" "Growing," she said. "It's not just a billing irregularity. There's a structure underneath it, something that was set up deliberately." He didn't react dramatically. He just absorbed it with the same steadiness she had come to expect from him, and she realized she had started to count on that steadiness, which was a new thing. She was not historically a person who leaned on people. She had learned too early that leaning came with conditions attached, and she had decided at some point in her 20s that self-sufficiency was cleaner, less complicated. Nolan Pierce was making a quiet argument against that decision, which he was doing without knowing it and without trying to, which was the most effective kind of argument. "Are you scared?" he asked. It was such a direct question that she almost deflected it. Almost. "Yes," she said, "not of losing the company. I don't think I'll lose the company, but—" She wrapped both hands around the terrible coffee cup. "There's a specific fear that comes with knowing someone is working against you. Not in the open, where you can address it. In the background, in the language of numbers and shell companies, and—" She stopped. "It's the hidden quality of it. That's what gets to me." He nodded. "Because you can't argue with what you can't see. I've been running toward every problem I've ever had. This one is moving away from me." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When I took over the mechanical systems in this building, the previous supervisor had let certain things slide. Not out of malice, just age and tiredness. Some of the reporting systems were misaligned. The numbers that came out didn't match what was actually happening in the pipes. And for a while we were making decisions based on what the report said rather than what the building was actually doing." She watched him. "It took me about 2 months to recalibrate everything," he said. "The fix wasn't dramatic. It was just going back to the original source, bypassing the reports entirely and reading the systems directly." He turned the paper cup. "Whatever they've built on top of your company's real numbers, the real numbers still exist somewhere. You just have to go back far enough. She stared at him. You're telling me to audit from the source data. I'm talking about pipe systems, he said mildly. But sure. She almost laughed. It was not a new idea. Sylvia had already been working back towards source documentation, but hearing it in that frame, from that angle, made something settle in her mind. The approach was right. She needed to stop trying to read the falsified layer and go underneath it entirely. Okay, she said. She finished the terrible coffee and stood up. Thank you. I didn't do anything. You did. You just don't know it. He looked like he was going to say something else, and then decided not to, and she left the break room and went back to the 4th floor and walked directly into Sylvia's office and said, Go to the source data. Ignore the reconciled accounts. I want raw transaction logs from the original banking integration. Everything before it touched a reporting system. Sylvia looked at her. That's going to take some time. I know. Start tonight. The 2 weeks before the Vantage conference had a quality of compression, like weather building before it breaks. Brielle felt it in the way the air in the building changed, or maybe she was feeling it in herself, which amounted to the same thing. The source data audit was progressing. What Sylvia was finding in the transaction logs was not yet a complete picture, but what it suggested was methodical. Small amounts routed through the Shell LLC, not enough to trigger automatic compliance flags, consistent enough across 8 months to represent either theft or preparation for something larger. The signatures on approving documentation were inconsistent. Some matched employees who had since left the company. One matched a name that appeared in board correspondence in ways that made Brielle's chest tighten when she saw it. She didn't go to the board yet. She didn't have enough. Going to the board with half a case was the same as losing. It would give them time to cover the rest before she could find it. Instead, she went to a corporate attorney named Denise Park, whom she had used once before on a contract dispute and who had the quality Brielle most valued in advisors. She told you what was true rather than what you wanted to hear. Denise listened to the whole thing in a single 2-hour meeting, asked 10 questions, and then sat back in her chair and said, You're right that you don't have enough yet, but what you're describing, if the source data holds up, is wire fraud. Potentially securities fraud depending on how the investor accounts are involved. This isn't just a board governance dispute. I know, Brielle said. This is criminal territory. I know. Which means you need to be very careful about who you tell and when. If the wrong person in your board knows you're this close, they will move before you're ready. Someone already knows I'm looking, Brielle said. I made sure of that. I want them to think I'm looking at the wrong thing. Denise looked at her steadily. How long can you hold that line? Until the conference, Brielle said. I need to get through the conference. Why the conference specifically? Because if they're going to make a move against my position, that's where they'll do it. 3 days in front of every major investor we have. Maximum pressure, maximum visibility. If I fall apart at Vantage, the board has their justification. If I don't, she paused. If I don't, and I have the documentation to show what's been happening, we flip the entire thing. Denise was quiet for a moment. You're using the conference as a controlled detonation site. I'm using the conference as the place where I present my company's results, because I run the company and that's what I do. I'm also making sure that when certain other things come to light, they come to light in front of the right witnesses. The attorney had a look that was not quite admiration and not quite concern, something in between. Don't do anything you can't document, she said. Whatever moves you make between now and then, you need paper on all of it. I've been documenting everything since October, Brielle said. I've been doing it my whole career. The call she didn't expect came on a Saturday evening, 2 weeks before the conference, while she was at her kitchen counter reviewing deck slides and eating leftover rice directly from the container. It was from a number she had saved under a first name only. She looked at the screen for a second. Answered. Nolan. Sorry to call on a weekend, he said. He sounded different than usual. Not alarmed, but careful, in the way of someone choosing words while they were still in motion. I found something. She set down the rice. In the building? In the mechanical records. I went back through the access logs for the server room, not the repair we did, the older logs. There were 3 unauthorized access events in the past 4 months, after hours. using a key card that was registered to an employee who left your company in August. She was very still. Someone has been physically accessing our server room, using a deactivated card that should have triggered a security alert but didn't, which means either the security system had a gap or someone disabled that specific alert. The security system is managed by the building, not by us. I know, which is why I have the access logs. They're in the building system, not yours. A pause. Brielle, if someone was physically in your server room after hours, they weren't just running billing irregularities. They were doing something to the actual hardware or software. She thought about the heating irregularity he had first flagged 3 weeks ago, the borderline condition that had been active for a month before he caught it. A server room running slightly too warm was the kind of condition that could be induced, that could cause intermittent data anomalies without triggering a full system failure. The kind of thing that made financial records slightly unstable, slightly unreliable. The kind of thing that, if your company later faced fraud accusations, would make it very difficult to prove the original data was clean. They were trying to compromise the source data, she said. I don't know what they were doing, he said. I know what the access logs show. I'll leave the interpretation to you. When did you find this? About an hour ago. I was finishing up the quarterly maintenance review and I pulled the full access history instead of just the last 30 days. I shouldn't have been that thorough, honestly. It was a Saturday. I had one more thing to check off. Something caught in her throat. Not emotion exactly, but the sensation of narrowly missing something significant. One less thorough Saturday, and this stayed hidden. Can you hold the logs? She said. Don't file them anywhere standard. Keep them. Already copied to a personal drive, he said. I wasn't sure if I should tell you, but it's your company. You needed to know. Yes, she said. I needed to know. A brief silence. Not awkward, just the kind of pause where two people are both sitting with the same weight. Are you okay? He asked. I'm working on it. That's not what I asked. She exhaled, looked out the window at the city, the same orange glow, the same stubborn grid. I'm angry, she said. I've been managing it, but underneath the management, there's anger. This is my company. I built it, and someone has been in my server room, in the dark, trying to dismantle what I built from inside it. Yeah, he said. That'd make me angry too. How are you this calm about all of this? I'm not calm, he said. I'm just not in the middle of it the way you are. He paused. And I've got Cora tonight, so I've had 2 hours of her explaining the aerodynamics of paper airplanes as a palate cleanser. Despite everything, she smiled at that. Is she still furious about the science fair? She entered a regional competition, just to prove a point. Did she win? I'll tell you when the results come in. A beat. Get some sleep if you can. You've got a lot coming. I will, she said, knowing she probably wouldn't. Brielle. Yeah. You built something real, he said simply. People who build real things usually find a way to keep them. She didn't answer right away. The statement wasn't dressed up in reassurance or optimism. He said it the way he said most things, like a fact he had observed from close enough to trust, which somehow made it land differently than if he'd tried to make it sound hopeful. Good night, Nolan, she said. Good night. So, she didn't sleep well, but she slept. And Monday morning, she walked into Luminary Systems and called an unscheduled meeting with Marcus and Sylvia and presented what she had. The Shell LLC, the transaction logs, the unauthorized server room access, the deactivated key card. She laid it out on the conference table in the order it had come to her. The spreadsheet in the parking garage, the source data anomalies, the physical access records, and she watched their faces move through the same sequence she had moved through. Disbelief, recognition, anger. How close are we to a complete picture? Marcus asked. Close, Sylvia said. I need another week with the transaction logs, maybe 10 days. We have 13 days before Vantage, Brielle said. The room was quiet for a moment. We're going to the conference with this, Marcus said. We're going to the conference to present our company's results, which are excellent, and which I will stand behind with every number we have, she said. We're also going to the conference with documentation that if anyone attempts to use that event as an occasion to move against this company or its leadership, we'll be ready for use." "And if they move before the conference?" Sylvia asked. Brielle looked at the table, at the papers spread across it. 8 years of company history, reduced to source data and access logs, and the patient work of a finance director who hadn't stopped digging. "Then we're ready before the conference," she said. "Either way, we're ready." She meant it when she said it. What she could not account for, what none of them could account for, sitting in that conference room with their documents and their plans, was that Holt and Vass were not waiting for the conference. They were already moving. The first sign of it came the next morning, when a financial news site ran an anonymously sourced article suggesting that Luminary Systems was facing an internal governance crisis and that key investors had raised concerns about executive leadership. The article was 4 paragraphs. It named no sources. It contained nothing specific enough to be demonstrably false and nothing concrete enough to be demonstrably true. It was the kind of piece that existed for one purpose: to put a name in a headline next to the word crisis and let the association do its work. Brielle saw it at 6:43 in the morning, standing in her kitchen before her first cup of coffee. She read it twice, set her phone face down on the counter, made the coffee. By the time Marcus called at 7:15 to ask if she had seen it, she had already drafted her response in her head and was on her second cup. "I saw it," she said. "How do you want to handle it?" "We don't respond," she said. "Responding validates the frame. We stay on course. Our PR team is going to push for a statement. Tell them no statement. Tell them we're focused on the upcoming investor conference and our Q4 results. Tell them anything that isn't a response to an anonymous article that doesn't deserve one. Brielle, Marcus," she kept her voice steady, "they want us reactive. They want us spending the next 2 weeks managing optics instead of building our case. We don't do that." A silence. "Okay," he said. No statement. She hung up and stood at her window with her coffee and looked out at Chicago in the cold November morning light. The low gray sky, the steam rising from grates in the street, the city doing what it always did, which was exactly what it was going to do regardless of what she was going through. She had 13 days. 13 days to close the gap between what she suspected and what she could prove, between the story someone was writing about her in anonymous articles and the story that was true, between the company she had built and the people who had decided her company was worth more to them without her in it. 13 days. She finished her coffee and went to work. The second article came out on a Wednesday. This one was longer. 4 paragraphs had become 12. The anonymous sourcing had grown to include multiple people familiar with the matter, and the language had escalated from vague concern to something more pointed. Sources indicate that Luminary Systems Board has been actively evaluating leadership alternatives ahead of a critical investor conference, citing concerns about the company's public-facing identity and executive decision-making. The piece ran on a financial technology publication with a readership of several 100,000 industry professionals, and by 9 in the morning it had been picked up by 2 aggregators and shared enough times on professional networks that Brielle's assistant was fielding press inquiries before the second cup of coffee. She read the article standing at her office window, the same way she had read the first one. Still, controlled, letting the words land without reacting. Then she set her phone on her desk and looked at the document Sylvia had sent her the night before. Sylvia had found the thread. It had taken 11 days of going back through raw transaction logs, cross-referencing against building access records, and running a parallel search through the board's communication summaries that Marcus had quietly pulled from the company's governance archive. What they had now was not a theory. It was a sequence. The Shell LLC, registered by a law firm whose senior partner had a prior professional relationship with Raymond Holt spanning 12 years, had been used to route payments to 2 individuals who had subsequently provided the anonymous sourcing for both articles. One was a former PR consultant who had pitched Luminary a contract 2 years ago and been turned down. The other was a freelance financial analyst whose name appeared twice in Hartwell Capital's published advisory roster, which was Douglas Vass's firm. Money to sources, sources to journalists, journalists to headlines, headlines to investor doubt to board justification, It was not sophisticated in its design. It was patient, which was worse. She called Denise Park. "We're ready," she said. "You have the chain of payments." "We have the chain, we have the shell, LLC formation documents. We have the access logs from the server room showing physical intrusion on dates that correspond to the financial irregularities. And we have a board communication from 6 weeks ago in which Holt explicitly references preparing the ground for what he calls a leadership transition in an email to Vass." She paused. He used the phrase "preparing the ground" in a written email. A silence on Denise's end. He wrote that in an email. "People make remarkable choices," Denise said, not quite to herself. "I need to know if I can present this at the conference, not as a legal proceeding, as context, as the explanation for what has been happening to my company and why. You can present documented evidence in a business setting. What you can't do is make accusations of criminal conduct without letting the legal process run, but you can present the facts and let your investors draw conclusions." A pause. "The fraud referral? You're filing with the SEC?" "Today, before the conference." "Good. Once that's filed, you're protected from retaliation for disclosure. If they try to use the conference to move against you after you've filed, they're operating in a much more dangerous legal space." "That's what I thought." "Brielle." Denise's voice was careful. "This is going to be a very visible moment. The room will be watching how you carry it, not just what you say." "I know." "How are you?" The question was almost jarring in its simplicity. She had been asked a version of it every day for 2 weeks by people who were really asking whether the company was going to be okay, or whether their jobs were going to be okay, or whether the investment was going to be okay. Nobody had asked it the way Denise just asked it. "I'll be better when it's over," she said. "That's honest." A beat. "File today. I'll have the conference documentation package ready by Friday." Done. She filed the SEC referral at 2:17 in the afternoon from her desk, with Sylvia and Marcus in the room. It was a strangely quiet moment for something that felt so large. A form, submitted electronically, attaching 43 pages of documentation. A reference number returned automatically. A confirmation email that would not become real to her until much later. Marcus let out a slow breath. "That's the line," he said. "That's the line," she agreed. Sylvia was already gathering her files. She had been working 16-hour days for 2 weeks and looked it. The particular tiredness that goes bone deep and doesn't wash out with a night's sleep. "What do you need from me for the conference presentations?" she asked. "Clean versions of all the Q3 and Q4 projections, the enterprise pipeline summary, and the audit results, the real ones, from the source data. I want them formatted for the investor deck." "You're putting the audit results in the investor deck." I'm putting the truth in the investor deck," Brielle said, "which is what goes in investor decks when the company is run by the person who built it." She saw Nolan that evening by accident. She had gone down to the parking level to get her car, and he was loading equipment into the facilities van, the kind of end-of-day gear stowing that she had learned to recognize as part of his pattern. He looked up when he heard the elevator, saw her, and went back to what he was doing without ceremony. She stopped. "I filed today," she said. He straightened, looked at her. "With the SEC?" "Yes." He didn't say anything immediately. He set down the bag he was holding and gave her his full attention in the way she had learned he did. Without performance, just direction. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I stepped off something very high and I haven't landed yet." He nodded. "Are you going straight home?" "I was going to go back up, actually. There's still—" "Brielle," he said. The way he said her name had a particular quality to it by now, not commanding but not asking either, somewhere between the two. In the register of someone who was not going to tell her what to do, but was going to say one true thing and then let her decide. "Go home," he said. "Whatever's still there will still be there tomorrow. You filed. That's done. Let it be done for tonight." She stood in the parking garage looking at him for a second. The fluorescent lights, the smell of concrete and motor oil, the hum of the city one level above them. "You're right," she said. "I know." She almost smiled. "You say that a lot too." "I say it when I mean it." She got in her car. She went home. She ate dinner at the kitchen table without her laptop, with the curtains open and the city doing its orange glow thing outside the window. It was the closest thing to a real meal she had eaten in 2 weeks, and she tasted almost none of it, but the act of sitting at the table without working felt like something she had decided to give herself, which made it matter. The Vantage Capital Investor Conference opened on a Tuesday morning in December in a hotel 12 blocks from her office, with a registration desk and a printed program and a coffee station that was genuinely good, which she noted because small mercies counted when everything else was running on adrenaline. Luminary Systems was scheduled for the second afternoon session, 90 minutes, main stage, her presenting alone with Marcus in the room as backup. The morning sessions were two other companies, a logistics software startup and a cybersecurity firm. She sat in the back for the cybersecurity firm's presentation and watched the room, cataloging the faces. Most of the Luminary board was there. Holt arrived during the morning break, moving through the room with his usual self-assurance, stopping to talk to people she had already identified as the secondary audience he was working. She watched him without making it visible, the way you watch a system that you now understood better than the person running it. Carver was also there, younger than Holt, early 40s, with the smooth ease of someone who had grown up with money and never needed to perform confidence because it had never been in question. He and Holt didn't speak directly all morning, which meant they had already spoken. Douglas Vass arrived at lunch. He looked her direction once, across the room, and his expression was so carefully neutral that it told her everything. A man with nothing prepared doesn't work that hard at neutral. Marcus appeared at her elbow. "They're planning something in the Q&A," he said, low. "I talked to Priya in investor relations. Someone reached out to two of the major LPs this morning and suggested they ask about governance and leadership stability." "Who reached out?" "She didn't have a name, just heard it secondhand." Brielle processed that. It was the play she had anticipated. Use the Q&A as a public forum to introduce the leadership instability narrative. Get the questions on record. Let the doubt spread outward from there. Sophisticated enough to give them deniability. Crude enough that she could see exactly how it was built. "Okay, she said. "Okay." Marcus looked at her. "I'll be ready for the questions," she said. "That's all. Let them ask." The afternoon session began at 1:15. She walked out onto the stage and the room settled into the particular attention that came with 200 people who had all read the same articles over the past 2 weeks and were now waiting to see who showed up. She could feel the quality of it. Not hostile exactly, but charged, expectant. The kind of audience that had already written a story and was watching to see if the person in front of them would fit it. She set her notes on the podium and didn't look at them. "Good afternoon," she said. "I'm Brielle Maddox, CEO of Luminary Systems. I've been running this company for 8 years, and I built it from $12,000 and a server rack that took up half of my living room." She paused. "I want to start today by telling you what I won't be doing. I won't be responding to the coverage you've read this week, because I don't negotiate with anonymous sources or the people who pay for them. What I will do is show you exactly where this company stands." A shift in the room, not dramatic, just a reorientation. She clicked to her first slide. For 60 minutes, she presented her company. Not the managed version, the real one. Revenue up 14% in Q3. Enterprise pipeline at its strongest recorded level. 2 new contracts signed in the past 30 days that had not been publicly announced. Employee retention at 91%, the best in the company's history, which she presented with the quiet emphasis of someone who knew that number represented 2,000 people who had decided to stay. The source data audit results presented as what they were, a compliance review that had uncovered billing irregularities and triggered a referral to federal oversight. She presented that slide in the same even tone as all the others, without drama and without hesitation, and she watched the room recalibrate again. She was almost done with her prepared remarks when Holt shifted in his seat. She saw it. She moved to the Q&A 6 minutes earlier than planned. The first 2 questions were genuine. A portfolio manager asking about the enterprise contract terms. A research analyst asking about the cybersecurity architecture. She answered both in full, with specifics, the way she always answered questions when the questions were real. The third question came from a man in the 4th row she didn't recognize, who identified himself as representing a secondary investment vehicle she had never heard of. Given the governance concerns that have been raised publicly this week, he said, can you speak to the board's confidence in current leadership and whether any formal review processes are underway? The room tightened. She looked at the man for exactly 2 seconds before she answered, which was long enough to make the question land in the space between them clearly. I can speak to that directly, she said. Luminary Systems filed a referral with the SEC last Thursday, documenting a coordinated effort to manufacture the appearance of governance instability through falsified financial records, unauthorized access to company systems, and a paid media campaign funded through a shell LLC. She paused. The board members involved in that effort have been identified. The documentation has been submitted to federal oversight. And to answer your question, the governance review that is currently underway is not about leadership confidence. It is a fraud investigation. The room did not erupt. It went the opposite direction. It went so quiet that she could hear the HVAC system in the ceiling. She kept going. I want to be specific about what we found because the people in this room deserve specifics. Unauthorized vendor billing routed through a Delaware LLC connected by payment records to individuals who served as anonymous sources for the coverage you've been reading. Physical intrusion into our server room using a deactivated access card on dates that align with documented attempts to compromise source financial data. And written communication between board members using language that, in the context of what the documentation shows, constitutes evidence of coordinated fraud. She advanced to the next slide. It showed the documentation summary. Not the full contents, which were now in federal hands, but the structure, the LLC, the timeline, the access events. I'm presenting this because my investors are entitled to know what has been done to this company and why, she said, and because I have spent 8 years building something I am not going to allow to be taken by people who had nothing to do with building it. She looked at the room, 200 faces, some stunned, some calculating, some the ones she cared about, nodding with the slow deliberateness of people who had just watched something fall into place. In the 5th row, Raymond Holt was very still. His face had the quality of a man reassessing the distance between where he thought he was and where he actually was. Next to him, Carver had his eyes on the table. Douglas Vass, 3 rows back, had his arms crossed and his jaw set in the particular way of a man who was deciding whether to walk out or stay. And she could almost see the calculation. Walking out confirmed everything she had said. Staying required him to sit with it for another 30 minutes. He stayed. She noted that. I'll take more questions, she said. What came next was 25 minutes of some of the most substantive Q&A she had ever been through. Not hostile, probing. The room had shifted from skeptical audience to engaged participants. From people waiting to see if the story they'd read was true to people trying to understand a story that was more complicated and more serious than they'd expected. She answered everything she could within the bounds of an active federal referral. For what she couldn't answer, she said exactly why she couldn't answer it, which is always more credible than hedging. By the time Marcus caught up with her in the hallway outside the session room, he looked like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. The LP from Meridian Group came up to me, he said. She said she's requesting an emergency call with the full investor group. She wants a consolidated update on the fraud investigation. Schedule it, Brielle said. She also said, he stopped, steadied himself. She said the firm is prepared to publicly affirm their support for current leadership ahead of any board restructuring process. Brielle looked at him. That's the largest single LP we have, she said. I know. Their affirmation changes the board calculus entirely. I know, Brielle. She exhaled, pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. Not because she was going to cry. She was not going to cry. Not here, not in this hallway. But because the physical pressure helped her stay inside herself while something large was moving through her. She had built the case. She had stood on the stage. She had said the true thing in the right room. It was not over. The legal process would take time. The board restructuring would take time. Holt and Vass and Carver would have lawyers by end of business, and those lawyers would introduce every complication available. It was not over. But the tide had turned, and she could feel it the way you feel weather changing. Not yet visible, but present in the air, in the pressure, in the way everything around you has already begun to shift before you can see the sky change. Get me back to the office, she said to Marcus. There's work to do. Hot tub. Nolan heard about it the way the rest of the building did, secondhand, through the general diffusion of news in a building where several hundred people worked and talked and checked their phones. By 3 in the afternoon, the story had moved from financial publications to general news, and by 4 it had been summarized in a text from Cora, who had apparently been following luminary systems since the science fair conversation and had developed opinions. He read the text while sitting in the mechanical room, reviewing maintenance logs. Dad, the lady from your building was on the news. She told them everything. It was really good. He sat with that for a minute. Then he sent back, yeah, she's something else. He went back to his logs. At 6:15, he was finishing up in the sub-level when he heard the elevator and then footsteps that he recognized. There was a specific quality to the way Brielle walked through the building, purposeful and unhurried at the same time, like someone who had already decided where she was going. She appeared at the end of the corridor. Her blazer was still on, but the top button of her shirt was undone, which for her was approximately the equivalent of anyone else having come completely undone. She looked tired in a way that ran deeper than one day. The accumulated weight of the past several weeks present in the set of her eyes. In the fraction of an inch, her shoulders had dropped. She also looked like someone who had done the thing they'd been building toward. I wanted to tell you directly, she said. It went the way we needed it to go. I heard, he said. Cora texted me. That surprised her. Your daughter knows about this? She's been tracking the story since I mentioned the building. I'm going to be honest, I created a situation I didn't fully anticipate. Brielle stared at him for a second and then laughed. A real one, not the polite near laugh of someone being gracious, but the sudden, slightly helpless kind that comes out when something is genuinely funny and you're too tired to hold it back. It was the first time he had heard her laugh like that. It changed her face in a way that had nothing to do with the CEO, or the crisis, or the gala, or any of the versions of herself she had been performing and managing for the past 2 months. It was just her, laughing in a sub-level corridor because a 10-year-old had been tracking a corporate fraud story. He found himself grinning. I told her the building maintenance angle, he said. I didn't realize she'd take an ongoing interest. She's going to be running something by the time she's 25, Brielle said. That's terrifying and probably accurate. The laughter settled. They stood in the corridor with the hum of the building around them, the pipes and the electrical systems and the infrastructure that kept the whole thing alive, and neither of them spoke for a moment. Thank you, she said. I mean it. The access logs, the transaction records. I don't know what I would have had without them. You would have found it another way. Maybe, but slower. And slower might have been too late. She looked at him steadily. You didn't have to keep looking. The first spreadsheet could have been an anomaly. The access logs were a Saturday afternoon extra step. You didn't have to do any of that. I know, he said, because it was the honest answer. She looked at him, and there was something in her face that she wasn't hiding, which was different from how she usually held herself. Not vulnerable exactly. She was not a person who did vulnerable easily, and he didn't think she was about to start, but open, present in a way that wasn't managed. The conference is done, she said. The fraud case is with the SEC. There's still a lot of legal process ahead, but tonight, she paused. Tonight I'm going home and eating a real dinner. At the table. No laptop. Good, he said. You said I'd replaced meals with refueling intervals. I stand by that assessment. She was quiet for a second. Then, Cora, when are the regional science fair results? Friday. Let me know how she does. I will, he said. She held his gaze for a beat. Then she nodded once. The particular nod she had that meant a decision had been made internally about something she wasn't ready to say out loud yet, and turned and walked back toward the elevator. He watched her go. The purposeful stride. The blazer with the one undone button. The particular quality of exhaustion and resolve that occupied the same space in a person without canceling each other out. He stood there after the elevator doors closed, in the hum and the fluorescence and the smell of the building's mechanical reality, and he felt something that he was not quite ready to name and was not going to rush. He had a daughter to get home to. He had a Friday to get to. The rest of it could wait. But it was there. He knew it was there. And some things don't need to be named to be real. They just need a little time and enough courage to let them grow.